Ooh,
I
we're
am
live.
live.
We are live. Shut your mouth. Writers, it's the developer here. And it's the gentleman gamer. Hello. We're live. Good God. It's been a while since I've been on this channel. It's been a while since anyone below has been on this channel. Only one of them has been here before. The rest of them have worked with me before, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. Firstly, hello. And it's good to be back. It's been a very busy 6 months since I was last on my YouTube channel. You may have seen me on the World of Darkness YouTube channel doing the V5 clan videos, but this isn't a video in which I play a character. This is me as Matthew Dawkins, one of the writers and developers for Onyx Path Publishing. Come to talk to you about the Chicago by Night Kickstarter. Chicago by Night is a sourcebook for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. It's the first sourcebook being published out of house, so by Onyx Path rather than White Wolf. And it's currently on Kickstarter. We have smashed through several stretch goals. We hit our funding targets in the first, I think, 13 hours of the Kickstarter. The book is looking beautiful. It is entirely written already, so the text is being steadily released to backers of the Kickstarter already, so you can read it at this early stage. And I have a desire to treat this Q&A a little like a telethon. So occasionally I'm going to check on the Kickstarter and see whether you have backed. Even if it's for the measly sum of $1, you can still back and read all the backer previews. Obviously, I prefer that you backed for more, but I've got a challenge for you viewers, you loyal viewers, who I can see the number ticking up in my bottom right corner of my screen. It's lovely that all of you are here. There's one backer level on this Kickstarter called The Fate of Prince Maxwell, and last time I checked, it was still there. It's at the upper end, so I'm sure not everyone's going to be rushing for it, but just to explain, something we did that was different for this Kickstarter was give backers the opportunity to decide the fate of a canonical character from Vampire the Masquerade, and Prince Maxwell was the 19th century Prince of Chicago. He appears in Chicago by Night 2nd edition. And along with a couple of other characters, we gave backers the opportunity to decide the fate of Prince Maxwell. Only one person can do it. And if you do it, and I would love to see someone back at that level while this Q&A is going on, when the Kickstarter is concluded and we start working on the stretch goal products and any bits and sundries we need to add to Chicago by Night, I'll be speaking to you, the backer, and we'll be working together to incorporate your ideas, your creative ideas on how to decide the fate of Prince Maxwell. What has happened to this Elder Bruja in the interim from Chicago by Night 2nd edition to this new book for 5th edition? You can basically gain creative input over a book like the other backers who have already backed at the Capone and Electria levels have done. And if this goes, we may be able to add some more levels like that for other characters who we haven't, frankly, had room to touch upon. So that's my gauntlet. That's the thing I've thrown down for you. I would love to see that backer level taken by the time this live stream finishes. And I'll look damn stupid if it doesn't, but I've got faith that at least one of you will back at that level before the time this Q&A is out. Now, without much further ado, and wow, okay, these viewer numbers are going up quite happily. It's always gratifying to know that people clicked on the alarm bell on YouTube for my channel. Thank you very much for that. It is always lovely to be back on here. This is my first home, I guess, online and in role-playing. I need to introduce you to some of the team. The team that constructed Chicago by Night is very diverse. That's by intent. Chicago is an incredibly diverse city. It has people of every background, every ethnicity, every culture. And we wanted to reflect that in the writing team. We wanted to reflect that by having Chicagoans actually writing the book, but also people of a multitude of backgrounds, because I particularly value on my books a diversity of voices. I think it makes a stronger product. I have 3 of those writers here with me now, and they're going to answer some of my questions, and then later they'll be able to answer some of yours, as I will as well. So I'll just introduce them. And something interesting about these three is none of them started on this project at the same time. If you think of the way a book might maybe outline and then I hire writers to write different chapters. So I wrote the outline for Chicago by Night and I was writing my chapter. One of the first writers I hired for the book was John Burke, who we'll get onto in a second. John Burke wrote a number of the characters, some of the lore sheets, some of the chronicle hooks for this book, and he'll talk about those very soon. Then, partway into the development of the book, we needed a really strong city chapter, something that spoke to the genuine city feel of Chicago. I didn't want Chicago to just feel like a generic metropolis, although it can definitely have parts pulled out so you can build your own city using this source book. I wanted a good part of the book to feel like Chicago, and so we have Mike Tomasek, who is the writer hired for that. And now, last but by no means least, this book needed a chronicle, a big chronicle, something that would speak to the updated V5 meta plot, latch onto the chronicle hooks that were laid out throughout this book, and some of the, I guess, vampire shaking events that are going on in 5th edition. And we have Clara here, Clara Herbal, hello, who is writing our chronicle for the book too. And it's a Lasombra focused chronicle, because one of the most exciting things about this book, something that's pleased some people, it's made some people raise an eyebrow, is this is the first book for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition that has the Lasombra in. The Lasombra are made playable, their discipline is detailed, their reason for being in Chicago is deeply linked into the meta plot, but we have provided lots of opportunities to make them playable and make them an integral part of a Camarilla or Anarch domain. So that's quite exciting. It's not something that's ever been done in a Vampire the Masquerade book before. So, without further ado, I'm going to go to John to maybe introduce himself a little and tell us something about his content for Chicago by Night. And I'm going to mute myself while he does.
Yeah, you do that. Well, yeah, hello everyone. I'm John Burke. I've been writing on a number of projects now for Onyx Path. This is the first one for Vampire the Masquerade, which is undoubtedly, I would say, my favourite role-playing game that I play. So I was very, very happy to work on it. Mainly what I've been working on for this is building character concepts. And that's something that I really like doing. It's something I'm quite at home with. But also we did a lot of what are called chronicle hooks. And these are essentially scenarios based around themes. So you might have a theme such as hunger or the beast. And we've produced a number of scenarios featuring characters in the book, or potentially characters that you might make, and saying, oh, well, here's a little thing. If you're storytelling a chronicle here, you could sidetrack your players. You could do a little thing here and say, well, now here you go. Here's a little thing to do with your hunger, or a little thing to deal with the beast inside you. And that ties in nicely to the characters we've created, because when we were putting those scenarios together, it helped to have an understanding of who might be involved. So we had quite a cast, as Matthew said, a really diverse cast, not just in terms of sort of like ethnicity or anything like that, but an actual like diverse array of personalities. There are some really, really evil bastards. There are some people who you could, if you look at them in the proper light, so to speak, see them as almost angelic, sort of beatific characters. There are people who are mostly in the middle. There are some evil, twisted plotters and a new prince and all sorts of different things. So the politics, the personalities and everything has been sort of shaken up, brought forward into the modern night. And it's been great to do. It's been fun. Also, Lasombra, I would say, I'm not going to lie and say they're my favourite clan, because Matthew will immediately shoot me down. But they're definitely my second, I'd say, favourite clan. behind my obvious favourite, as some of you will know. And just the chance to be one of the people who helped introduce them to this new line. Yeah, you're not going to turn that down. I think anyone watching this would agree. If someone came to you and said, you could have the chance to do something, you're going to go, yeah, okay. How much money? Don't care, just let me in. So yeah, it's been great fun, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And the longer I'm on screen, we're making money, as we all know. So I think we've probably got $6,000 in the Kickstarter just for that.
Well, yeah, I don't know about that, but well, look, it's me again. It's Mr. Moneybags. But one thing, John, if you could tell the viewers about Michaelis Basarus, who is one of your characters, and a Lasombra who has been added to this book. He's new for this edition, new for Chicago, but he is one of the kindred you might encounter in Chicago by night.
Well, Basarus is he's from Cyprus originally. If I could use his tagline, he is a nihilistic theologian. Michaelis is essentially, he's a rabbi, and when you read his story, you'll see over the course of his life, he has grown wary of things that are of this world. He's a very spiritual thinker. And this has led him into the service of some very dark entities, which are expounded upon somewhat in the book, who have brought him into the embrace of Clan Lasombra. Essentially, he's positioned himself here with a purpose, which you'll see more about as time goes on, I'm sure. And while it seems politically expedient, obviously, for members of the clan to be here, he has his own reasons, and he hasn't told anyone what they are, funnily enough. Basically, he is a cultist of sorts, or perhaps a cult leader, or maybe he probably thinks that, let me put it that way. And he is here to bring people around to his way of thinking, which is essentially that he hates reality, and as a Lasombra sees this primordial darkness, this oblivion, this thing that is the entity that the Lasombra call upon with their discipline, as if not God itself, then God-like, a being of incredible power and wisdom. When he reads any holy text, he goes, well, oh, look at this, there's a beginning, and in the beginning there is this darkness, there is this nothingness, there is this emptiness that existed before reality did. So he sees that not only as the God that existed before the world, as the creator, if you want, but also as perfection, as what reality should be. It should all be enfolded back into God, or whatever it is he wishes to call it, or anyone wishes to call it. He would twist it around to that. Well, you're what you're really worshipping is this thing that existed before reality, and reality itself to him is a sort of a twisted perversion of that, as a cancer that's growing on it that he wants to cut out entirely, basically. I'm sitting here smiling. I'm like, he's going to wants to destroy the world. What a lovely
he's a lovely guy.
He's a champ.
Well, I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna move on to Clara. Clara, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you have written for Chicago by Night?
Hello, everyone. My name is Clara Herbel, and I have been writing for Onyx Path for about a year. Still pretty new to the whole scene and writing thing, but I've been on a couple of projects now, and this is my first Vampire the Masquerade project as well. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to Troy Stewart and Skeeter McGee for backing the book. Thank you very much for that. So I don't want to spoil too much. I'm the writer behind the chronicle of the game, and I don't want to spoil too much. I want to give you kind of some tidbits of the story and the vision I had when I wrote the chronicle, essentially. And what I really think is the coolest thing about it all is you are able, as your courtier, as your group, to decide whether the Lasombra joins the Camarilla or not in your game. And I want to give the players this opportunity, because I think player intuition and decisions are alpha and omega. So the prince will basically tell you to pick up this delegation from O'Hare Airport in Chicago, and he will not tell you who that is, and that will of course be the Lasombra delegation. And it's your responsibility to guide them through Chicago the first night before the Elysium, where the Lasombra will actually announce that they want to be a part of the Camarilla. So you have to take care of this group of Sabbat in Camarilla City, which is, as you might imagine, pretty dangerous. And you will have to defend this group, and you will have to basically defend your actions in front of your own clan, in front of other clans, and in front of yourself. So this is also very much a way for your character to delve into what they think is wrong or right. And it's a way of kind of a self-exploration, because when you bring someone that dangerous into a city, you have to take a beating for it, and you will meet a lot of characters and a lot of NPCs that doesn't necessarily agree with you essentially helping the Sabbath to join the Camarilla. And so in the very, very end, after you've met the Lasombra, after you have created your own opinions, you will be able to decide if you think the Lasombra should be a part of the Camarilla or not. So that's the vision of the chronicle I wrote, and I want to give the storyteller and I want to give the players as much freedom as possible, but it's also a game you can just pick up and just run. It's not something you have to do a lot of legwork to actually be able to run. So I want it to be easy, and I want it to be playable, but I also want it to be something you guys can mold, because I think that's so important. I don't want to restrict storytellers. I don't want to restrict the players too much, but at the same time, I don't want it to be confusing. So you can basically do what you want with the game, and that's I think that's super important when running it. So it will just give you a lot of puzzle pieces, and you can make your own puzzle and make your own story and create it with your friends. And yeah, that's basically my my vision.
Maybe if you could tell the viewers a little bit about one of the characters who appears in the chronicle, Malikov.
Yeah, so we have a new character appearing in the chronicle called Preston Malikov, and he is a very special man. He is one of the Lasombra delegates, and you will quickly learn to either love him or hate him, because he's just one of those people. So he's had a very hard upbringing, both in his living and undead life, and that has just marked this character in so many ways. So if you don't know him, it's hard for you to pity him, because he's just such an asshole. And you'll see what I mean if you play it through. But if you actually get to know this character, you can maybe understand where he's coming from and understand his actions a bit more. Preston Malikov is from Siberia, and he is very much a
Oh, I'm gonna cut you off there. I don't want you to say anything else about him.
Okay.
I think we've covered Malikov a lot. Just to add, there's going to be a few Lasombra in this delegation, and it's not about integrating Sabbat with Camarilla so much as specific Lasombra legates, being delegates who have been appointed by the Amici Noctis or Friends of the Night, are being sent forth to Camarilla cities, especially jewels like Chicago. And the best of the best are being used to represent the clan. And Malikov, by Lasombra standards, is probably one of the best of the best. He's a war hero in the sectarian wars, but that doesn't mean Camarilla kindred are necessarily going to appreciate his war record. I'm going to move on to Mike now, but before I do, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been backing the Kickstarter. Just since we started this Q&A, the figure is going up. In fact, it just went up right in front of my eyes. Good God! I want to draw attention to one more thing on the Kickstarter. I mentioned the fate of the former Prince Maxwell backer level, which again I would love to see taken up before the end of this Kickstarter, because I like working with fans on integrating their creative ideas into a game. So talking to them back and forth, a few emails here and there, and being able to shape what happens to this important character in future source books is something I'm looking forward to. But we've only just added a new back level, and that is called the Gentleman's Game. And it's something we put on a lot of historical Kickstarters for Onyx Path, but haven't done for a while. It's a special reward that enables you and as many friends as you like, up to 5, to play in an online game of V5 featuring me. I mean, it doesn't have to be V5. You could ask me to run anything within range, I guess. But if you back at that level, I'll run a game for you, and if you like, we will broadcast it live, or it'll go onto my channel. I don't mind. So yeah, that's probably the highest backer level I think that's available on the Kickstarter right now in terms of value. But obviously, if you're doing this with a number of friends, your own little coterie, then you can split the cost and get an experience out of it. If you want to experience my storytelling style, which is variable, but if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know the kind of things that happen in my games. So yeah, unfortunately, John, who is on this call, has been in my games. And if you're familiar with the Ivory Wall live play, which was a 1991, I guess, set, Berlin by night, where
all of the Berlin Wall. Yeah,
the fall of the Berlin Wall is happening. East and West Berlin are coming together, and there's 2 separate Camarilla courts on either side of the wall, and both of them think they own the city, basically. But anyway, if you're interested in that, check that level out on the Kickstarter, because hopefully it will be taken up. But the fact that I can see the figure ticking up on the Kickstarter as this Q&A is going on is heartening to me. It's gladdening, because this is a fantastic book. The art is brilliant by such fantastic artists as Amy Wilkins and Mark Kelly and a whole slew of others. Check that out on the Kickstarter too. So without further ado, Mike, I've been prevaricating too long. Tell us about yourself. What did you write?
Hey, yo. So hi, I'm Mike Tomasek. I have been working with Onyx Path for a while now, about a few years. I'm a born and raised Chicagoan. So when Matt came to me to work on this book, I knew I had to really do my best as I was representing my own city. Before I go any further, though, I do want to say thank you to any of you guys supporting the Kickstarter. It means a lot to me, of course, as a writer, but it also means a lot to me as a Chicagoan. One of the things that I wanted to do when I was writing this book is to represent the city that I love and the city I'm from. There's a lot of people that love to talk shit about Chicago. Chicago's got violence, and it's got this and it's got that. But Chicago's also home for, the Chicagoland area is up to 9 million people. And this is where we're from. And it's important for us to represent it in a really positive way. So thank you for helping us facilitate that. And I appreciate that. But moving on, some of the things that I did, of course, was I had to kind of make the city of Chicago without making the city of Chicago. Very much going back into the show, not tell way of storytelling. So what was the first thing I did? Well, me and my wife, we drove around Chicagoland and looked at cool, awesome things. Went through neighborhoods that I love. I've worked as an educator all over the city, so I've had time in the west side and the south side. I was born and raised in Hegwish on the east side, a side that the previous books said either doesn't exist or doesn't really matter. But there's a good amount of neighborhoods that are over there. And so I wanted to show people, and of course the north side, but as a south sider, I try not to talk about them a lot. I joke. I wanted to show people what the mechanics of a city can be represented through these things. So I kind of took my creative direction from the Chicago flag itself. And if you don't know about the Chicago flag, it basically is the river, the lake, the three sides of the city, and the stars themselves represent events that have happened in the city. So, of course, with the white background, I kind of explained, okay, these are the places, this is the land, this is all the things that are going on. With the blue bars, I kind of described the major events in the city. So this is where I provided mechanics for city building and, made the Homestead system and the Spirit of the City system. Those things were created with the help of Matt and myself to kind of provide ways that storytellers and players can interact with the location that they're working in. And then, of course, the red stars, which is awesome places that are in the city of Chicago. A lot of those places I've been to. I have you guys have seen it if you've backed it. So one of those places is Steve's Bar. I mean, that's a real place on the east side of Chicago that not a lot of people know about unless you're a local, and but it's got the Anarch vibe, and I thought it was very important to go, hey, these are real locations that really can provide depth and breadth of the way of life that Chicago has. So basically, I was just kind of trying to make it so that everybody enjoys it as much as possible, but also can take that same model and overlay it your city, because everyone loves where they're from. Or doesn't, for that matter, and that knowledge is really great because you could then provide it for your players, and those little tidbits are the crunchy bits that players love so much.
Well, that was very thorough. Thank you very much, Mike. I just wanted to get you to explain, for anyone who hasn't been following the Kickstarter yet, but is just getting onto it, if you go back through previous updates, once you back, I think you'll have access to all of those historic updates. The city chapter that Mike is talking about has already been previewed in full. And this is the thing with all the chapters that we are putting up on Kickstarter. They're pre-edits, so forgive any glaring typos or non-capitalization of the word kindred, but I generally find those, don't worry. But we are very keen on letting the backers see what they're getting. It's no different than walking into a game store and flicking through a book. Before you buy it, through our process on Kickstarter, you can do that. And Mike's chapter, The City, has been previewed in full. You can read it already. It got very good appraisal by the backers who have seen it already. But Mike, could you explain exactly what the Homestead system that you've just talked about does to a game, or does to a city? Sure.
So Chicago is referred to as the machine. Because of our lurid past and colorful politicians. The Homestead system, in my mind, was I wanted to create, effectively for a storyteller, a machine that can zoom in and out of play. We all love having our kindred have their cool haven. So if you have your venture, you have your awesome skyscraper, or your brew high, you got your knockdown drag out bar or whatever. But we never really provide too much mechanics for all of that. And what I wanted to do with the Homestead system is go, okay, so we have we have good rules for haven. What about the surrounding block of your haven? because Chicago works on a grid system. We have blocks, and it's a big part of our culture. But what about the neighborhood? Because neighborhoods are a big part of our culture as well. And then we can zoom out even further to the sides of the city, and then even to the city itself. And this model creates systems within systems within systems that you can provide to your players to manipulate and to play with, to create more depth to the city environment itself. So, and you can play an entire campaign just on your block. You know, you can have, you know, your grandma that's next door that's asking why you're up so late all the time, or, you know, your block parties that you're expected to be at. All of those things can be created and have actual mechanics to them. And provide, again, more style of play. And this, again, this was made for any location. You know, it could be boroughs in New York or villages in England. Anywhere that you want to play, this system can work for.
Thank you very much, Mike. So, as you were talking, I promise I was listening. As you were talking, I have been watching the Kickstarter go up as well. And I know people viewing this, listening to this, may get frustrated with the fact that I keep mentioning the Kickstarter. But the reason I do is, for one thing, that's the purpose of this video. So, you know, that's life, I guess. But on the other hand, it's a book we're all very proud of. It's a rarity that an entire team comes together and works on a book with passion. And I've particularly enjoyed recently, a lot of the projects I've been developing have had a huge collaborative efforts, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes teams aren't massively collaborative. Sometimes you get lone wolf writers who need to work in solitude, and that's fine too. But when you get books where the teams of writers are happily just working together, they're bouncing ideas off of each other, they're going off into their own private chats and saying, okay, so you're writing this character, so I'm going to write a character like this who connects to yours like that. That's wonderful to see, because we're creating a world together. And this book really feels like that. It feels like a campaign setting. And that's a term not often used for vampire or anything in the world of darkness. It's usually reserved for Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or another game, you know, fantasy game. But Chicago by Night for 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade feels like such a complete city. In the terms of its kindred roster, we have around 50 supporting characters, SPCs, in this book. In terms of its city layout, in terms of the meta plot, the driving chronicles behind it, the lore sheets. We have a whole plethora of lore sheets, which I know a lot of people love, that were in Weapons of the Gods. That's another RPG, and are also in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, to allow your characters to tie into the meta plot. So my point is, we're all very proud of this content, and it's been received remarkably well on the Kickstarter, through the comments, through the updates, people just commenting throughout, and on social media as well. The Discord channels that I have to give props to, by the way. I've only recently found the World of Darkness and Vampire the Masquerade Discord channels, and they've been incredibly welcoming and incredibly upbeat about Chicago. And again, thank you very much, everyone who has been supportive of this process on there too, which is why, to cut a long story short too late, I'm so gratified to see that figure on the Kickstarter going up as we're doing this, I guess almost a telethon, because it shows that you're supporting the work we believe in. We are passionate about it, we do believe in it, we think that this is a good product, and we think you will enjoy it. So if you have any spare dollars or pounds or whatever your currency happens to be, please consider backing, even if it's just to buy a PDF version, or whether you want to go for one of the upper reaches of this Kickstarter backer levels. We are hugely appreciative of it. So with that said, I suppose we've kind of covered the book in a fair amount of depth, but we're going to open it up. This is called a Q&A, and we've been running for 30 minutes now. We have about an hour left. I do anyway, and I might hang around for a bit longer than that if questions keep coming. Clara has very kindly agreed to select questions and to pose them to the group. I will potentially delegate them to one of the writers or answer them myself. And we're basically looking for your questions. So I know there's going to be a delay of around 5 seconds, 10 seconds from me saying this to you hearing it. So I would like for you to start thinking of your questions, start posting them in the chat log, and Clara will ask them of us once I get to the end of this very long sentence, which I keep talking over so that you've got enough time to ask a question
We
so
have
there's
a
no
question
awkward
if
silence.
you could be quiet for a moment.
I don't know how to be quiet. I haven't breathed for the last 10 minutes.
We have a question from
Well,
David Veras. Is
that's all right.
obtenebration
Just oh, sorry, you carry on.
is obtenebration its own discipline or branch of another in V5?
Oh, good question. I suppose that was going to come up, and it's good that it's come up so quickly. This will be previewed during the course of the Kickstarter, but I think it's a good time to actually drop this piece of information. Obtenebration is out of the game now, I'm joking. The Lasombra now just have obfuscate. That isn't what's happening at all. So, to give a bit of background, some of the clans in V5 have now had their speciality disciplines from previous editions merged into other disciplines. They still have access to the same powers for the most part, but now, for instance, a lot of Quietus is split between obfuscate and blood sorcery. And Serpentis is another form of Protean. Dementation is another form of Dominate and Auspex. So, what's happened to Obtenebration? Well, now's the time to answer. Obtenebration is now a discipline called Oblivion. Oblivion, and if you are familiar with your World of Darkness games, Oblivion is a very specific part of the World of Darkness. We haven't completely got rid of the Obtenebration name, don't worry, it does show up. But you might have an idea from what Oblivion is from, what discipline Obtenebration has merged with. So I'll leave you to ponder that. I'll leave you to think about that rather than confirming it outright. So while a lot of these disciplines are getting a bit streamlined, but they have what I love in RPGs, which is almost trees of power. So you have multiple options for 2 dots of Dominate now. You will have multiple options for 2 or 3 dots or 4 dots or whatever of Oblivion. And they may be your old favorite Obtenebration powers with a few modifications. They may be powers from another discipline set that you're a big fan of. So there's your answer.
All right, we have another question here from Meredith Ann.
Who could that be, Mike?
Yeah.
Oh, I could never know. Jeez.
What is the coolest thing you learned about Chicago while researching for Chicago by Night?
Oh, well, I should probably put John and Clara on the spot here. Because, well, actually, no, you know what? Mike, you're the one who toured Chicago, and what I'm quite interested in, because you're a Chicagoan, you probably, before working on this book, felt you knew your city incredibly well. So what new things did you learn from your tour of the city?
Yeah. So I mean, I've taken classes on the Chicago history and things along those lines. So I thought I knew a pretty good amount, and I've worked, like I said, I've worked all over the city and that sort of things. But actually, the coolest thing I learned about was the Pirate King of Chicago, which was James Streeter, who Streeterville, where Navy Pier is located currently, rammed his ship into a sandbank. If you don't know, Lake Michigan is like effectively like a freshwater ocean. It's so vast that it actually has, like, it creates its own sand. So back in the 18-something, I think it was the 1840s, this circus owner named James Streeter, who was a rather eccentric dude, rammed his ship onto a sandbank and got a bunch of garbage and made a bridge to Chicago and declared his own country. and like there was a lot of problems because all the rich people lived right there. And a lot of these folks were like, trying to sue him, and the city of Chicago is trying to get him out. And this is back in the day when, you can hire Pinkerton thugs to come attack people and stuff like that. So of course, that's what the rich folk of Chicago did. And he got a shotgun and shot a dude in the face. And not only did he not get convicted of attempted murder, he got off because he tried to say that shotgun birdshot is not a weapon that will cause death. And as you know, Chicago trains. So because of that, this gentleman got to win his space and basically stayed within the Chicagoland area until his death sometime after the Civil War. And it's just insane. So I had no idea about this guy. Obviously, he's got his own neighborhood now. So it was pretty interesting.
And in previous editions, he probably would have been a vampire. Probably a Bruja. No, actually, if he's a pirate, a Lasombra, of course. That may not be a road we're going down in 5th edition immediately. I did actually see the question from Keegan, hello Keegan, that are you mad, Lasombra with necromancy? Think of it like this. Lasombra used to have dominate, potence, tenebration. Giovanni used to have dominate, potence, necromancy. Yeah, it's a fairly... I think it's a pretty easy crossover, but that's not to imply what the Hecata, the Clan of Death, as they're known in V5, is going to have as their discipline spread. So we'll get on to that. Do we have any other questions, Clara?
Oh, we have lots of questions. Jolted, please excuse me, but I don't know how to pronounce this correctly. Jolted Jock?
Jolted Jock.
Yeah, exactly. Will we get Lasombra previews in the Kickstarter?
Yes. That was easy.
Yep. Let's move on then. Lawrence, why do you guys have these difficult names? Lawrence.
Just go with the first names.
Lawrence, will we get a special edition of Chicago with all the add-ons printed in it?
The stretch goals, which we have been hitting quite happily, which are for the Chicago dossiers, which are going to be Camarilla and Anarch books focused on the secrets of Chicago, basically. Lots of chronicle hooks, lots more characters. It's a natural expansion to the book. And we have Let the Streets Run Red, which is a chronicle book of the old style, like the Succubus Club book for first edition Chicago by Night and so on. Those two, I think, have got possibly achieved 2 chapters each now via stretch goals, if memory serves. I may be incorrect on Let the Streets Run Red, but they're not going to be folded into the Chicago by Night, because that would make a book that's around 200,000 words already ridiculously sized. There's a few reasons why we don't want a ridiculously sized book. One is because the cost of postage will go up even more. Another is because people don't really like to buy massive books because the price tag just goes up slightly more than can be tolerated. So the likelihood is those 2 books will at least come out in PDF. But if we do well enough on Kickstarter, then we'll do a traditional print run, if we do very well. Otherwise, they'll be available in print on demand. Obviously, the books have got to be of a decent enough size to warrant that as well. But at the rate the Kickstarter's going, and if you keep backing, and this is me looking at you, keep backing the Kickstarter, because it's doing well. We need your support for it to do even better. As a little bit of a hint, the Chicago dossiers can probably stand to have another 2 blocks in for another 2 prominent factions. We've got the Camarilla and the Anarchs. There's another 2 factions that could probably go into that book. And we have Let the Streets Run Red. I could foresee that having 4 distinct chronicles that expand out from central Chicago, Chicago suburbs, rural Illinois, Indiana, through to Milwaukee and Indianapolis, the domains of Milwaukee and Indianapolis. So that book could get pretty decently sized as well. But for that, we do need you to back. So if the fate of Prince Maxwell is still on there, If the backer level to have a game run by me is still on there, please consider putting your money down. Clara, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we have Joseph who asks, how much of a role will the Second Inquisition have on Chicago by Night?
Ooh. Well, that's a good question, because so far they don't have a huge role on this book. There are hunters in this book. There is definitely lore in character backstories of how they have been using the Second Inquisition against their enemies. I think, from memory, one of the SPCs, one of the supporting characters from previous Chicago by Night editions, Jacob Schumpeter, essentially had the Second Inquisition sent to his house by a rival in the city, and he has not been seen since. So the Second Inquisition are definitely present. Chicago is a metropolis, so it would be unlikely for it to be completely outside of their remit. But because of how strict the Camarilla are being in Chicago, the new prince has a list. He goes to one of the Anarchs, Genghis, and he says to Genghis, "You're an Anarch, but you're a respectable Anarch. I want you to come up with a list of 10 Anarchs who can stay in Chicago. If any self-declared Anarchs appear in Chicago and aren't on that list, they are subject to the Blood Hunt and immediate elimination." So immediately you make almost a defector, a traitor of the Anarchs. You allow him to keep his 9 friends around, because presumably Genghis is on the list and every other Anarch isn't. And this is the Camarilla's way of making the Anarchs fight among themselves. It's also a way of making them restrict their number. It's a very brutal way for the Camarilla to operate, but V5 has shown that the Camarilla are getting increasingly elitist in attitude. What's next? A question John or yourself could answer.
Let's see. We do have a question from Aka. Is Marcus Vitel or Tally the Hound featured in the book?
Well, you could say that, Clara.
Yes. My answer to that question.
Which one?
I know only one of them will be present in at least my chronicle.
It's safe to say Marcus Vitel is still quite happily Emperor of Washington, D.C., and how he is quite safely Emperor of Washington, D.C. with that level of governmental scrutiny as exists in DC is a story to be told in another city sourcebook somewhere down the line. Okay, what's the next question?
We have a Tremere related question here. How will the Tremere hierarchy being broken up affect them in a large-scale city environment like Chicago? And will there be any Tremere specific story hooks?
Do any of you feel prepared to field that question, or shall I?
I'm not sure there's specific story hooks, but there's certain characters that I thought were quite strong in the Tremere. And also, you have to recall that the Tremere, even in the previous editions, had sort of defectors, if you want, that were the Anarch leaning and stuff like that. So that ties in nicely to the fracture, if you want, that's occurred. And there's certain traitors, if you want, within the ranks, going against the hierarchy of the pyramid as it exists now. But the Anarchs themselves, some of them, certainly particularly one of the characters I wrote, takes a very dim view of that, since the people he hates the most are traitors, particularly to people they're meant to be protecting. So yeah, it's definitely quite well covered, I would say. I wouldn't say we back down from that particular thorny issue.
I will add the Tremere do not have a member of a primogen on the council in Chicago by Night, so that is a plot point. Thinking about why the Tremere would not have a primogen, and it's safe to say Nikolai, the previous primogen, is no longer in Chicago.
I would like to say also. Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off. Out in the what is now the collar, there are some plot hooks for the Tremere clan, specifically the Theosophical Society, which if you Google that and take a picture and to see a picture of it, it basically is any Tremere player's like chantry in your mind. It is identical. It is a big brick building with ivy leaves and all that sort of stuff on a big grassy knoll, which is a real place in Wheaton, Illinois. But that is specifically for the Karna, because I wanted to give them a little bit of something special.
Yes, House Karna is one of the houses of Clan Tremere in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, and they get a little bit of a spotlight in this book. A little bit. What's up next, Clara?
Well, Keegan wants to know if we are mad since we want to make a necromantic Lasombra.
Yes, that's the one I pointed out earlier. No, we're not mad. We're not Malkavians. We are perfectly rational Ventru in this room.
Get out of here. My two favourite clans are Giovanni and Lasombra, and, you know, necromancy and tenebration together. I don't even have anything to do with it, but it works. You know?
Well, Darren, he asks, with the stretch goal of the extended areas, are any of the cities in Michigan going to be mentioned or detailed?
It's possible. I mean, we're going to have to hit a lot more stretch goals yet to get, you know, somewhere like Detroit. But the first ones we're going to hit are, well, will hopefully be Milwaukee and Indianapolis. I've already sketched out what their court systems will be like, essentially, and you could expect to see some of the kindred from those cities. Some of the backers, that's the thing, some of the backers of this Kickstarter have backed to have their characters added, or they can help come up with characters to add into these books, and it's quite possible they will be added to those cities or Chicago or somewhere in between, because again, we're hoping to do some rural Illinois and Indiana and the like. So Michigan would be fantastic, because I think the people on this call are probably aware. Once upon a time, I did this stupid hitchhike across North America and nearly died. And I had the opportunity to visit a lot of states, as one does. And it's fascinating to see even the difference between the rural side of the US, because everyone thinks of the cities and the different characters each of the cities have, but the different rural communities, going from the sort of hyper-religious to the hyper-industrial to the completely cloistered community that appears to be completely self-sufficient, was an amazing thing to experience. And places like people don't consider Illinois, for instance, to be much more than Chicago in a lot of cases, but there's a hell of a lot there. I have a lot of these tiny little communities, and some of them are quite weird as well. What's up next?
All right, so we have Luis, who wants to know, one of the most controversial characters, Harold Goodston, Pariah, the Abomination. Are we going to see him once again? Are we getting new rules for it?
We will not be seeing Pariah, the Abomination, at least not right now. That doesn't mean he is gone. That just means he is not in Chicago by Night as it is currently written. I've got a lot of love for him because he, I think, is the first Abomination introduced in Vampire the Masquerade. But yeah, at this point, he is not in the book. Doesn't mean he won't be with stretch goals. So, you know, if that's motivation to back to see an Abomination.
We have ST Amity, who asks, do you cover thin blood concept at all? Perhaps give some interesting hooks involving them.
Yes, there's we've actually got a decent cachet of thin bloods. Did you write any thin bloods for the book, John? No?
I didn't, but I noticed the other day that there's a specific coterie, I think, relating to the thin bloods.
Mm-hmm.
And they have sort of quite nice little rules. I really like the way actually in the coterie system it breaks down, if you want, their turf, but there's like specific mechanics and rules attached to that and what that means for them as a group, and that exists outside of their personal status and such. And the Thin Bloods are definitely covered inside that, as well as, if you want, what everyone thinks of that, because obviously not everyone is very welcoming of these harbingers of the apocalypse. But no, there's seemed a fair amount of content there. I didn't personally write any characters, but there you go. Why would I do that when I have so many mighty, powerfully blooded vampires to choose from?
One of the Thin Bloods are often obviously outsiders and portrayed as being weak and pathetic and almost peripheral to the centre of Camarilla politics, but at least a couple of the Thin Bloods introduced in this book are pretty linchpins, in the sense that if they fall, an awful lot could tumble after them. There's one in particular who is the tool of another agency, speaking of Second Inquisition, and yeah, if he gets his way, things go horribly wrong for the rest of the city.
Well, I can also say that in the Chronicle there will be a very important Thin Blood character represented.
I think it's that very same one.
Might be.
Mm.
So we have Rob, who asks, is it safe to assume that not all of the Lasombra want to join the Camarilla? If so, will this be represented in the book?
Yeah. We mentioned the character of Malikov earlier. I think he could be described as a reluctant convert, or at least he doesn't understand exactly what the great appeal is. Now, I can't foresee what's going to be in the Sabbat book. I'm sure there will be a Sabbat book at some point, but that isn't something we're working on currently at Onyx Path. But it would surprise me if we were treating all of the Lasombra as joining the Camarilla. That isn't the intent. And indeed, the kind of rites of passage that Lasombra wanting to join the Camarilla have to go through is going to make some think, you know what, I'm just going to stick with the Sabbat, or I'm more likely I'm going to go and join the Anarchs. A few people have actually asked me, because they obviously heard through previews and the like that there's going to be a Lasombra presence in the Camarilla in this book, and they said, why aren't they joining the Anarchs? It seems more in keeping with their Sabbat portrayal, especially as they were one of the founding Sabbat clans and therefore one of the leaders of the Anarch movement. And my reasoning, my core reasoning, although there's lots of little reasons to go alongside, and it will differ for every individual Lasombra, is clan pride. The clan is known for its ego. It's known for always wanting to triumph. It's known for a certain level of ruthlessness, and certainly not laying down with the dogs, otherwise they might get fleas. So they joined the Sabbat because they felt the Sabbat were the right thing to do. The Sabbat were going to be the winners in all of this grand jihad. And now there's some very influential Lasombra who feel the Camarilla are on the winning side. And joining the Anarchs is a little like joining the B team, when the Camarilla are the A team.
Right.
Yep.
We have several questions from Carolyn. She asks, you may have covered this already. Other than the setting, what unique qualities will Chicago by Night have? Sure stats, but ambience, adversaries, openness, echoing, the political corruption, etc.
That's going to be Mike. You're muted though.
Yes,
Mike.
I got it. Yeah, I know. My mouse was a little weird. So I worked very hard to try to provide that ambience of Chicago. One of the mechanics that I kind of created was that was taken from a lot of the other vampire books in the past, was the truth and lies. Every city has truths and lies connected to it. And I think that it's very important for storytellers to kind of, and players, to come together and kind of create some truths and lies about a city. And the ones that I made for Chicago was Chicago is corrupt. Chicago is, has all these nicknames. Chicago has a lot of violence, things like that. And whether or not that's a truth or a lie is really dependent upon what the storyteller wants to create within their chronicle. Depending upon what your troop wants to do, they might have a lot more violence or a lot less violence or things like that. But all of that is geared towards creating kind of a feel of the city, and Chicago definitely has that feel, including but not limited to talking about Rod fucking Blagojevich, which is Matt's hero. And
no. I'm going to cut that off right there. I was just reaching for the shelf. Rod Blagojevich is a corrupt Illinois politician of the past 10 years, and I encountered him at Chicago Comic Con. This was when he was on trial. Around the time he was on trial, he was trying to raise funds by basically hijacking people, making them take photos with him, and then holding his hand out and saying, "Now you owe me $50." It was one of the most embarrassing displays I have ever witnessed from a politician or so-called politician. But I've got a photo of him. He's now close to my heart as the kind of politician Chicago occasionally breeds. Clara, what's the next question?
We have FGHHGFPH, who has...
I appreciate your commitment.
What's up with the Tzimisce? I ask myself that every day.
I think that's all you can really say. What is up with them? There's a lot that's up, down, in, out. They aren't in this book because they haven't been detailed yet in V5. I have no doubt they will be detailed soon in a book. It's not going to be in one of the stretch goals for Chicago by Night. That wouldn't be doing them justice. The Lasombra have a meta plot reason for being in Chicago, and I was the person that pitched for them to be in Chicago. That was my pitch to Onyx Path and then to White Wolf, and it was so...
Oh no. Well,
he's dead, Jim.
Matt, are you there, buddy?
Oh, did I cut out?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Tzimisce got me.
They knew.
Yeah, needless to say, the Tzimisce will undoubtedly come up in a future source book, but they aren't in this one.
Vicissitude is now part of necromancy.
No, don't say that. Someone will cut that tiny bit of the video.
Claiming everything now.
Yeah.
Let's see here. We need some questions, guys. And if you back the Kickstarter, please just tell us in the chat and I will give you a shout out.
Yeah, especially if you back at the Decide the Fate of Prince Maxwell. I know I'm going to keep hammering on about this, but I'm going to be deathly disappointed if no one backs at that level before the end of this. Come on, you get to decide the fate. You get to work with me. How fantastic is that? That should be the reward. We get to work with me on deciding the fate of an important character in Chicago's previous editions, and we'll work together. We'll put that information in a book. We will basically brainstorm, exchange emails, chat over Skype or what have you, and come up with some fantastic idea of how to integrate that character. Capone is already taken. Eletria is already taken. That just leaves the former Prince Maxwell, and for me, that was the golden one. I'm amazed no one went for this brouhaha, but you still can, unless I have missed that someone's been backing that in the last half an hour. I'm going to assume not. We
have Michael, who asks, I don't recall seeing the previews of the NPCs or SPCs having a predator type. Is there a reason this new aspect of V5 was left out? wouldn't the predator type could help the storyteller portray the character?
That was left out partly for space, partly because it isn't something I found that the storyteller really needed, because the characters have already got such an extensive backstory. Adding the predator type on top didn't really seem to add to that, so it was a conscious decision not to include it. There's a few things that a player character would have detailed on a character sheet that the SPCs in this book do not, and I would suggest maybe that if the characters were more condensed and were just pitched as concepts, something like predator type would be appropriate, but in our case it just wasn't.
And thank you, Eggman Sizzle, for backing. Thank you very much.
Eggman Sizzle backed.
Eggman Sizzle.
I recognize that name. I think he's been subscribed to my channel for some time.
You poor thing. We have Nicholas, since you repeated your question, I'm gonna read it out loud. It is said Methuselah will have immense power that can shake a city. Will Helena have that power?
So Menelaus or Menelaus or Menel is gone. Helena is an incredibly powerful Methuselah who could, I guess, in theory, uproot the city and shatter the political paradigm. But the question would be, why would she want to? She's over 2,000 years old. She's going to have far more either incredibly esoteric plots to her in her head than politics, or incredibly petty plots, because after you've been around for that long, your mind is almost alien. I think the most interesting thing about Helena as a character in this book is explaining how she has not resisted the beckoning so much. The beckoning, if you're familiar, in V5 is where an awful lot of the elders, not all of them, but some of them, are making a migration somewhere, largely from North America and heading east, for instance. Helena did leave Chicago, but Chicago has welcomed Helena back. She has returned from her beckoning, and that's not something that's ever really been covered in any of the books so far. I know there's not many of them, but her bio will explain how she thinks she managed to stave off the beckoning, and the same ideas will be applied to a lot of the elder characters in this book. They all think they found the route to staving off this siren's call, but maybe they're right about their theories. Maybe they've just plunged into monstrosity to stave off something that was never calling them in the first place.
And Joshua, thank you for backing with $35. He asked, so what do the Anarchs think of the new prince?
Well, the new prince, it's not any great spoilers because his artwork has been posted here and there, is Kevin Jackson. Kevin Jackson is a Ventru, one of the childer of Lodin, one of the previous princes of Chicago. He's a very young prince, and in previous editions he was very sympathetic to the Anarchs. So at first glance, Kevin Jackson is the shiny new hope. He's a modern prince for a modern Chicago, and he has a whole range of influence. He's the kind of character who is not strong due to his disciplines, which are pretty average. He was embraced in the 1970s, so he's not had much time to become a Methuselah in power. Rather, he is a background-heavy character. His power comes through his influence, and so he has influence over things like education, through technology, through his previous street level operations. And he was written by Chris Spivey, one of the authors on this book, Emmy Award winner Chris Spivey, who among many of other authors did a fantastic job. So to get to the question, on face value, Anarchs probably look at Kevin Jackson and think, well, that's a good move. That helps us out. But then they'll probably find that Kevin is almost as hypocritical as most of the other Camarilla vampires, especially with his list of 10 Anarchs in the city, especially with his idea that we will school all new fledglings. We will send all of the fledglings to Critias's academy, and they will learn the traditions. And if they fail, we'll pick them up, dust them off, and make them good. But of course, there's no such thing as detention for Kindred. There's no such thing as retaking a year. If you fail in Jackson's city, you disappear. So yeah, the Anarchs like him until they don't.
And Jolted Jock, again, she asks, what part of the Lasombra did you want to focus on versus didn't?
Which parts of Lasombra did I want to focus on versus the ones that I didn't?
Mm-hmm.
No more.
Well, John, as you wrote one of the Lasombra, why don't you tell us with your character what you focused on in terms of Lasombra story as opposed to what you didn't?
I wasn't too concerned, certainly, about if you want just sort of purely get into, this is the Lasombra and the evil, dark-wielding, wizardy bastards. I tried to take more of a dive into the philosophy that makes them, like you talked earlier about, like they're egocentric, they're sort of borderline narcissistic in many ways, very much, I don't know if in the mold of the Ventrue would go down well with the Lasombra sense, but they have a lot of similarities in that sense, that the sort of monomancy, kind of like, we are the best and I am the best of the best sort of thing. And all of them has that belief. And where does that come from? Well, it's different for every one of them. And I just really like exploring how, depending on where they came from, what they've seen, what they've been doing, that can be twisted in many different ways. It's like what makes them all similar and different at the same time. I think what we've really tried to go into with them is the political aspect. So when we were talking about Kevin Jackson earlier, I think the most interesting thing about the city and the Chronicle in general is this idea of balance, and Jackson sort of really embodies that. And the Lasombra coming into the city is a weight that could unbalance the scales. And what Matthew was referring to earlier about, like, well, if they're not happy with the deal put forward by the Camarilla, they could very easily hop on over to a nearby barony and say, well, what if we just back you here and you could make a play in this weakling neonate prince over here? So, yeah, he owns a lot of things. We'll slap him out of the way, with our combined powers, we could take over. So that's a balancing act for him to perform, that he doesn't want to sort of overly placate the Lasombra, because that's embarrassing. And they can't be seen to just come in without cost, just come in from the cold, especially after everything they've done as a clan. But at the same time, he can't really afford to make enemies of them, especially not now. And when you read, I think his character background might be available to backers, because I think some of the Ventrue was. I could be wrong. If it's not, you'll all see it if you back, I'm sure. Eventually, you'll get the book.
Yeah, eventually. He's not on there yet, but he will be soon. Well, within the next week or so.
Well, his political outlook is very much around maintaining that status quo, but doing it because he can't enforce it with an iron fist. And the Lasombra add another interesting dimension to that, because yet again, here's people you can't force into a bad deal. But yeah, so what we have tried to do with them is make them that interesting thing. And the character that I created in particular, the Lasombra, he's not part of the delegation. So you've not only got these sort of, if you want, important Lasombra of rank coming into the city to negotiate this political settlement. You've also got some Lasombra who are there, because there are a fair amount of anti-tribu in the world. And you've got this guy who's there, and what does he make of this? So someone asked earlier, well, what do the other Lasombra? They're not going to wholesale just all agree. Yes, a clan is still essentially a collection of individuals, right? So it's interesting then to have those different perspectives. And even if you wanted as a storyteller, you could have things like maybe someone in the delegation wants the things to fail, maybe some people in the Camarilla side think this is a way of Lasombra getting into the city to perform a task in particular, you know, and all of those intrigues tie in. And Lasombra, as I say, I've always loved them. A very intriguing clan, especially with the philosophical and kind of religious aspects of their background. So I think we kind of focused more on that than just what we could have done is just sort of went, oh, like this is really all about the Lasombra and how their powers work in V5, and here they are. And each character embodies, like, he's really good at doing this level of Oblivion, and he's really good at doing this other thing. So we sort of avoided that and focused more on what is it about them that unbalances, that brings that imbalance, brings that intrigue to the chronicle, where what you have is at the center of it all a prince who's basically trying to perform a juggling act with juggler as one of the balls, funnily enough. So they're another weight on the scales. I may have rambled, but that's really what.
That's all right. People like you rambling, John. That's why they play your Vampire the Masquerade YouTube experiment. Clara, do we have any other questions?
Oh yeah, we do. First of all, Joseph Bird, thank you for backing. He asks supernaturals other than vampires in Chicago by Night, V5.
There are lupines. There is at least one hunter of renown in Chicago. But beyond that, we aren't detailing any because, quite frankly, the core books for those games haven't come out yet. So we can't go too far into what the Order of Hermes are doing in Chicago or what the Get of Fenris are doing in Chicago because we don't know how they're going to be presented in Werewolf 5th edition and Mage 5th edition. Not in that order, obviously. If the Order of Hermes was suddenly a tribe, something's gone horribly wrong. So lupines will be there as a threat, but there's an uneasy truce right now, a very uneasy truce that may be about to be broken.
We have CRK 1142. I backed for the PDF version. Thank you very much. My question is this book recommendable for someone running their first vampire game? And I can say from my perspective, I try to write the chronicle so everyone can pick it up and play it. And I really think with Chicago by Night and V5 overall, that we've managed to create a game that most people can actually enjoy, and it isn't too much work to get into. And if you do want to get into it, and if you do want to go into big details, you have the opportunity to do so as well. But it's something that everyone can pick up. So I definitely think the Chronicle is player friendly, even if you haven't played or run Vampire before. I would say it's more enjoyable if you do know a bit about the vampire lore, but you don't have to spend nights upon nights reading about it before you can actually enjoy the Chronicle.
Yeah, I'll add to that, actually. One of my favorite things in Chicago by Night First Edition, and not in any of the other City Source books, were the Chronicle hooks at the back of the book. There's at the back of Chicago by Night, there are a whole bunch of these almost random encounters that have different headers that tie into the various themes of Vampire the Masquerade, and specifically Chicago. And I loved them. You know, they were instant chronicle hooks, whether they lasted a single session or multiple weeks. And it's something I really wanted to reintroduce for this book. So just like Clara's core chronicle, which is around 20,000 words in length, so it would probably last around, would you say, 2, maybe 3 sessions, Clara?
Yeah, it depends on how long your sessions are. I would say 10 to 15 hours.
Yeah. We've also got these chronicle hooks that have headings like the Beast and Hunger and Hierarchy, which are our sort of core principles for Chicago by Night. So you have plenty of jumping off points using this book. You don't need to know the historic meta plot to get it.
I certainly would say as well that if you're talking about Vampire in general, I've always found it to be a game that's easy to pick up simply because it's about people. It's not, you don't need to understand so much the deep meta plot in order to understand people. You know people. You're a person. You know, in general, if you're playing the game. So it's like, imagine it's you, and you're faced with, you've been turned into this monstrosity. You've been changed. You've been introduced into this new world. How difficult is it going to be? How are you going to deal with that? And with those as the core themes, I just think it's something that pretty much anyone can play, because you can always put yourself in those shoes rather than, I am an orc. Oh my god, you know, roll a d6 to gain a new enchantment. But yeah, as I say, I think it's instantly relatable, just because, as dark as it has effectively got one foot in the real world all the time.
Yeah, I can definitely agree to that. I think what is magical about vampire is, even if you don't know anything about being a vampire, you can still have an enjoyable game, because you can play a character that doesn't know anything, and that could be one of the most fun experiences you can ever have as a player. Some of my best experiences playing vampire is playing a complete oblivious new person in this horrible world, and you have to get used to being a monster, essentially. And I think playing around with that and playing around with your humanity is really interesting. So we do have the Camarilla Courtier of Omaha, who has backed it as a group, and that is awesome, you guys. I think that's really, really clever. And Matthew did say this before, but you can definitely back it as a group and enjoy it, and just share it and use it many, many times, instead of having to buy it, you know, as a single person, because that might be difficult for some. So do definitely go together with some friends and buy the book.
And I love Omaha, I love Nebraska, but and if there's an entire coterie backing, remember, you can back at the gentleman's game level. I'll run a game for all of you, and you know, split the cost. It'll be a great time. We can record it, put it on this channel, and you can look back at the happy memories of where I killed your characters horribly.
Okay, we have a question from Ariadne Quinn. What is the ratio of new NPC to pre-existing ones?
It's around 50-50. I think it had to be. If we maintained all the classical characters, it would appear that Chicago hadn't changed at all in the last, how long has it been? 20 years, I suppose, since Chicago by Night 2nd edition. 22 years, maybe. So we had to remove some through plot. Most of their removals are nebulous. We haven't outright said many of them met final death. I mentioned Jacob Schumpeter having a second Inquisition visit to his haven. We haven't categorically confirmed he's dead, so if you want to carry him over to V5, all power to you. But it was also, you know, it's a more exciting, more interesting project for writers if you get to write new characters as well. I think there may only be one writer on the book who just wrote classical characters, and all of them are rewritten. There's no copied and pasted text or anything like that. So hopefully it will provide a fun experience for anyone, whether they're a fan of the old editions or just looking for a new city source book to get onto.
And no new wave Masquerade. I do not believe your question about the ministry was answered, so please post it again. I must have missed it. My apologies.
Yep. Technically, we only have 7 minutes left, but you know what? I'm able to go a bit longer. If others have to drop out, that's fine. But if it takes that long to get to your question about the ministry, New Wave Masquerade will wait.
I wouldn't have my longevity questioned by you.
So Nicholas asks, what can Oblivion do?
So Oblivion being the Lasombra discipline, which I don't really want to break it down dot by dot, Nicholas, and I'm sorry about that. But that will be something the preview will tell you. That you're going to see a lot of old favourites in there of Lasombra obtenebration powers, but you will also see a couple of historic necromancy powers that have been tinkered with slightly to make them feel appropriate for Clan Lasombra. So where this leaves the Hecata when they get introduced, and any rituals they have, such as for blood sorcery, is going to be something you'll find out in a future book. But this book will introduce Oblivion very much from the Lasombra perspective.
And Søren Hjort, hi Søren, asks, why no stats for Juggler? He's so much fun. Also, Maxwell is an interdimensional SBC. He's in the Requiem as well.
Yep. So no stats for Juggler because he's in Gary, and this book is set in Chicago. That was easy. Gary is another city relatively nearby in American terms. Like a 2-hour drive, I guess, outside of Chicago, 2 or 3. If you particularly want to drive through a ruin, it's right there on your doorstep. That's not fair. Some of the city has been very much rehabilitated in recent years, but a lot of it hasn't. So if you're into your urban nightmares, Gary is an interesting place to look up online, if not visit in person. Anyway, as for what was the other character mentioned other than Juggler?
Maxwell.
Prince Maxwell. Prince Maxwell is an interdimensional NPC. I know the reason he is in Vampire the Requiem as well, and that he is also the Prince of Chicago in Vampire the Requiem, or was up until the end of first edition. I think his daughter, his child Persephone, might have killed him. I'm testing my lore knowledge of Requiem in a Masquerade video. But yeah, I do know the reason. I don't know if it's public knowledge, so I'm not going to voice it here.
All right. So let's see. Spectra 007 asks, not sure if this has been answered, but are we going to be seeing a backer-only preview of the Lasombra soon?
You will definitely see it. Our fantastic Kickstarter organizer, James Bell, will know the schedule better than I, but they are on the schedule. You will see them before the end of the Kickstarter. There's no doubt about that. We're very much committed to giving the backers as much of the text as we possibly can before the Kickstarter runs out. And if we don't, you will get to see the rest of it after the Kickstarter concludes. Simple as that. The book is written, so there's no reason not to. The only thing we haven't done is edit, get all the art in, and lay it out. So in terms of turnaround to get a completed book, it shouldn't be that slow. It should, in fact, be fairly quick.
All right, we have Ariadne. I hope that's how you say your name. Will there be more predator types in Chicago by Night?
We haven't introduced more predator types in this book. That's something we could very interestingly do in a future book. We have introduced new coterie types, we've introduced new lore sheets, but we haven't been able to introduce new aspects of every single part of the character creation blocks. I think it would make perfect sense if we were doing a future book to, let's say we did DC by Night, and I'm not saying we are, but let's say we did do DC by Night, to, instead of having new coterie types in that, we would have predator types and lore sheets, and in another one you could have new Haven types and something. So yeah, I think that's something we could definitely explore in future books.
We have a question from Gaga. Obviously not all V2 Chicago by Night vampires will make it through this edition. Who were you glad to get rid of?
I've mentioned Jacob Schumpeter twice now. I think it was just his illustration that made me want to get rid of him. And that's not to say it was a bad illustration, just really didn't like the look of him, didn't like the cut of him. A character I was really glad to get rid of, Maureen O'Leary, the Malkavian Primogen. Didn't find her terribly interesting. She's actually tied to historical characters. The O'Leary family of Chicago was fairly prominent in the 19th century, as Mike might know.
Do you want me to go a little further on that?
Yeah, do, please.
Sure. Okay, so there's a common story within Chicagoland about the Great Fire. We have found that it's most likely not true, and is most likely stems from the anti-Irish sentiment of the time. But there was the idea that the O'Leary family owned a cow, and the cow knocked over a lantern, and that lantern started the Great Fire of Chicago. That's most likely not what happened. Most people attribute it to either a candle or a street fire or something along those lines. But because of that, we had characters within, the old Chicago by Night books that had the O'Leary name. We still have one in particular. I think Son is still around, right?
Well, he's not genetically an O'Leary, but his actual name is Jason Newberry.
Oh yeah, Jason Newberry. Yeah, I apologize, but being the sire of Jason was Miss O'Leary, but she has left the undead coil for what it is. So.
Okay, we are at the 1.5 hour mark. So at this point, I'm going to say to you, brave viewers and listeners, firstly, thank you very much for staying with us for so long. It's nice to see the viewer numbers pretty much stabilized throughout. So that's fantastic. Thank you. And this video will be available to watch after we're done as well. It will take some time to process, as these things do on YouTube, but you'll be able to view it. If you've not backed the Kickstarter yet, I'm asking you, please do give it some thought. Do consider it. And it doesn't really matter what level you back it at, but please consider investing in the book, because hopefully from the art alone on the Kickstarter, you can see that it's going to look beautiful. And hopefully from the way we've been talking so passionately about the content we've been writing for this book, you can tell that the content's going to be interesting and usable at your table. So what I would love to see the figure on the Kickstarter go up a little more. Bear in mind also there's some add-ons you can add. So if you add like $7 to your Kickstarter, I think it is, you get all the previous Chicago by Night books and all their associated supplements. If you, I think, add $6 to your Kickstarter, you get Beckett's Jihad Diary for $6 as well in PDF. And those are damn good deals. They're better than you get on DriveThruRPG. So even if that's all you do, even if you just add $6 to get Beckett's Jihad Diary, that's a fantastic book. I should know. He said with only a small amount of arrogance, but that's been very well received as well. So I'm okay to stay for a bit longer. How do the rest of you three feel?
Yeah, me too.
I would love to stay a little bit longer. Sure.
All right.
Why the hell not?
Keep firing questions at us then, Clara.
All right. Doma Gosh asks, are we gonna see the Arms of the Abyss power again in Obtenebration/Oblivion?
Yep. Arms of the Abyss will still be here. One of the things that will have changed about Arms of the Abyss is the way it manifests. It was a strange thing about Obtenebration that a lot of the time it was described in book text as being 2D, only sort of seeps along walls and floors because it's shadows. And then as soon as Arms of the Abyss comes out, whoosh, you're going to got tentacles. It's all gone a little weird. Arms of the Abyss in this edition is going to be more, I guess, more a mental power, because the tentacles are still there, the tendrils are still there, but they're going to be snaking along surfaces, and they'll still be manipulating you. They'll still be snaking up your leg and your body and your arms and trying to rip you apart. It's not be thick black tentacles doing it. It's going to be thin tentacles that are basically coating your body and tearing you apart, which for my money is a more interesting visual and more in keeping with it feels more vampire than something with explosive thick black tendrils.
And Rob Freebird, thank you for backing. It does not matter that you can't get any add-ons or can back at a higher amount. It says here you actually did get an add-on, but you did get the physical book, and thank you for that. We appreciate it. And New Wave Masquerade, I'm finally getting to your question now. Again, my apologies. Do the Ministry have a presence at all in Chicago?
They do. The Ministry are in Chicago. I think there's 3 Ministry vampires in Chicago by Night. So for anyone unfamiliar, the Ministry is the V5 version of the Followers of Set. The Followers of Set have undergone something of a rebrand explained in the V5 Anarch's book, and explained a little further in this book. They're now known as the Ministry, embracing their roots as the Clan of Faith, a more polytheistic clan that basically clings to any religion that isn't worshipping Cain. And they are the Anarch's spiritual center. The ministers in Chicago aren't necessarily of the Anarch stripe. I think a couple of them very easily could be, but they each have, two of them at least, have very important roles to play in the city, one of whom is the proxy primogen for any clan that can't put a primogen forward. Somehow a member of the ministry stands up and says, you know, oh, I'll speak for your clan. And another one is very much the host of hosts. If the Succubus Club, Red Number 5, and Blue Velvet are the three big clubs in Chicago in this edition, the Aluk, who is one of the ministers, he can host a party anywhere. He could do it in a park, he could do a street party, he could do it in the damn sewer, or at one of the train platforms. And everyone would come because Aluk knows how to draw a party and how to keep people entertained.
Frank says that he will probably be a bagger, and he will have to see what his bank account is saying to that. And to that, Frank, I just have to say, do you have both your kidneys? Because if you do, I know someone that can.
Clara's a nurse, so she does know someone. There's a thriving black market in Denmark for stolen organs. One thing I will actually say before we answer your question, if you have one, Frank, is a lot of people aren't aware of this with Kickstarter. It only takes the money at the end of the Kickstarter. You can basically pledge as much as you like now. And I'm not encouraging you to do this, but you can cancel a pledge. My point being that if things don't work out for you financially, you can pull out, and there will be no harm, no foul. But don't be afraid of backing if you want to see the updates, and make your decision later on.
So what Matthew is essentially saying is that you have plenty of time to sell that kidney.
Yeah, one or two.
I wouldn't recommend both. Might die before you get your book. Samuel asks, what about the Succubus Club? And I can say that the Succubus Club actually plays a very, very big role in the Chronicle, and it will be hosting the Elysium of the Chronicle.
Lovely.
And we have a question from Thomas. Hi, can you explain the pledge where you give the opportunity to name a character for Chicago by Night? Is it just naming it, or can you reshape this character with you? And hello from a fellow lover of conventional fonts too. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Thomas. We probably bumped into each other. I hope you're not the person I accidentally punched in the chest. So that's a story for another day. Let's see, the backer level for naming a character. So there was a backer level for actually adding a character to the book, and that is the Primogen level. That will actually allow you to detail the character you want added to the book. There are 3 of those left. I'm looking at the Kickstarter page right now. The backer level, which is Elder of Renown, that allows you to name an NPC. Obviously, if you name Boaty McBoatface, we'll probably ask you to change that to something more sensible. But
Boaty McBoatface.
By all means, you can specify the kind of character you want to name, and we will try and tailor that. But that backer level is lower cost because it has less overall impact on the book. So if you send us the name and a full bio for the character, I can't guarantee that character is going to get in, but it's worth a crack, I guess. What that backer level does guarantee is the name that we come up with, and ideally you suggest and I say that's fine, will end up in the book in some manner or means.
Stormbard asks, will Gofara feature in the book in any way, shape, or form?
She will not, because we haven't covered demons yet, and there's some. Gulfora is a literal succubus who was in Chicago by Night first edition, I think. Maybe even been in second edition, and this was before Demon the Fallen came out. Now there's been a lot of demon games between that and now. and there isn't anything like that 5th edition. And mainly, we want Chicago by Night to feel like a vampire book first and foremost. It's about the vampires' stories, and specifically vampires and mortals. There's a hell of a lot in this book about how the vampires relate to the mortals around them. If you read up on their kindred histories on and their thralls and tools in their various write-ups, you will see the kinds of mortals they are attached to, whether it's via touchstones or whether it's their entourage or what have you, because that's fundamental to Vampire the Masquerade. In short, Gulfora is not in the book, and I hope that isn't too disappointing to you.
SC Amity asks, as a fan of Clan Toreador, can you give us a preview of perhaps a new Toreador character, or perhaps partake in some gossip about a clan hook that may be featured?
I'm gonna look it up now and see.
I got one.
Oh, okay, go for it.
So on the Hush, on the north side of Chicago, the Toreador somehow pushed through a very special new Elysium, one by the name of the Neo-Futurarium, which in real life is the longest running late night kind of black box theater show in Chicago history. But the Toreador have their hand in this place, as it is it's made some waves and definitely has some pull within the Chicagoland theater scene.
Okay, nice.
Mm-hmm. And Jason asks if there will be any werewolves, mages, etc. in the book, and I'm pretty sure you answered, Matthew, we will have lupines, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Mages?
No mages. Well, unless you count the Tremere, and mages don't count the Tremere as mages, so I won't.
Daniel asks, sorry if this has been asked before. I don't think it has, Daniel. But are we going to be seeing abyssal mysticism in Chicago by Night?
No. Abyss mysticism is an extension of Tenebration of Old. That doesn't mean it's not going to be in V5 at some point, but it's still very early days. You know, if you think of the big 13 clans and the kind of discipline powers that we've not seen yet, like vicissitude, like necromancy, like chemistry. Abyss mysticism is pretty far away from that. Another person asked me, are we going to see the Kia Seed in this book? And I love the Kia Seed concept. I love the idea of fey vampires. They don't have to be changelings that are embraced, but I love the idea of really weird fey vampires that may not even be Canaanites. But again, I think there'd be a riot on various parts of the internet if we introduce the Kia Seed before we introduce the Tzimisce. There's a part of me now that wants to do it, but I'm not going to.
Saran asks if any new cool Ventru characters will be in Chicago, I suppose.
Yeah, there are. There's at least one. But you know what? I would like John. John, you wrote up Sovereign for this edition, and he's
I wrote through Gritted Teeth.
Yes. What's Alan Sovereign up to in this new Chicago?
Alan is seneschal now, which is nice for him. I actually found quite an interesting arc for him. Like when you read through the different editions, he's been through the ringer. The guy, always sort of beaten up by his sire. These days, he's doing quite well for himself. He's always worried that after everything that's happened to him so far, that the next sort of hurdle is about to come along and trip him up. But he, as we talked about earlier, with the kind of, if you want, in terms of power, certainly weaker prince in place, is a man of excellent position, certainly as far as he sees it. Lately, we're talking about Toreador again, trying to get closer to that clan. He's trying to make a lot of safe investments. He's lost a fair amount of money over the years. And he sees, if you want, the sort of artistic side of things to be a safe investment. He's trying to befriend those people. And also, the Toreador, to him, seem to have, maybe he's not entirely certain of how, but a strange strange guiding hand through this. These times of strife, but they seem to be people he wants to be close to right now. He is, of course, as I say, very worried that it's all going to come back and bite him in the backside, and it might, because of the other Ventrue character I wrote, who is more concerned with the lower orders and establishing a kingdom of sorts in the dirt. And why he's doing that will become clear to you when you read him. But I don't want to go too far into him, I suppose.
No. He's probably the last great spoiler. But he's kind of a new character, I guess.
He's a new old character.
Yeah. If people haven't guessed who it is yet, they will.
They'll be DMing me right now.
One of the things I particularly like about Alan Sovereign, the character, is I mentioned one of the night spots in Chicago in this edition is a club called the Red Number 5, which is a new. It's not even an Elysium, but it's a very popular spot for vampires to visit. And I would be lying if I said there weren't direct inspirations from Harlem's Paradise from Luke Cage. That it was written. Red Number 5 was written up by Jiba Mole Anderson, one of our authors on this book, who is also a Chicagoan, and he's very much into the music scene, the live music scene in Chicago, especially hip hop, house, and so on. And Alan Sovereign, this rather weaselly, waspish-faced little old white man, is so desperately trying to cling to the most fashionable, trendy bastions in the city and trendy kindred that he frequents Red Number 5 and must look like the most out-of-place undertaker of a character in a place like that. But I'm actually really fond of Red Number 5. I think it's an exciting new venue that you would be able to set a lot of your chronicle hooks in. So I'm hoping people explore that.
It's certainly a wonderful idea as well to put a character like that there as well. Not just necessarily him, but that idea of these ages-old kind of people. I mean, he's not that old in the grand scheme of things, but he's quite old-fashioned. But these characters that are saying, well, I guess I've got to try to be part of this, and going in and being completely unsure of themselves. And you have that mix, as we were talking about, with the temporal power and the sort of esoteric power. So you've got someone who's like, I could literally kill everyone in this club, right? You know, like I could just go, you're all dead, right? But that doesn't matter because you look like a complete twat standing there, you know, with your Persian robes on and your weird hat, you know, like, what are you doing here? And everyone's looking at you going, what? So you can't command the respect or the charismatic presence that maybe you want to. And with everything going the way it is with the Inquisition and everything like that, you don't want to be overtly throwing around your disciplines to cow that sort of respect into people unless you really, really have to. So it makes the youngsters, if you want, far, far more important to people like Sovereign, because it's the only way it can stay relevant to a city that's changing and growing and developing and whose culture is now far, far different from when he came up through the ranks.
Any other questions, Clara?
We have Gareth Clark, who asked, does anyone in the city hold any influential sway over the oppressed, poor, or homeless?
Gareth loves the oppressed, poor, and homeless, which is why he's asking that question.
There's a couple.
The character who we alluded to before, who will remain nameless, is definitely one of them. But yeah, there's a few people competing in that sphere, I would say.
Yeah, at least one Kaitaf, at least one Nosferatu as well, and at least one Ventrue are trying to get that stranglehold on the downtrodden and forgotten people in Chicago, of which there are far too many. Well, far too many for us to think about in real life, I guess. But as far as a manipulative kindred is concerned, it's almost an army waiting to march to your tune.
Oceanius Veritas asks, will there be playable photos of set in Chicago? I'm pretty sure we answered that question.
Yeah, we've got 3 ministers, 3 members of the ministry within this city, and so yes, you could quite easily play a member of the ministry in Chicago by night. As far as I remember, we haven't written anywhere in the law that the prince or the primogen have restricted the number of ministers, which may be a massive mistake. Princes should always clamp down on the number of setites or ministers that are available in their domain, or things go horribly wrong. Trust me, I've had experience.
So Vasil asks, will there be minor, not powerful characters detailed in the books? This is what I enjoy the most in my games, also backed by the physical book. Thank you, Vasil. And yes, there will be, and I will be using a couple of them in my chronicle, because I agree with you. I do believe that a good variety in power is important to have a certain balance in your game. Jolty Jog says orcs confirmed for Chicago by night. Absolutely.
Yes, there are orcs. They're called Clan Gangrel.
Yeah, totally.
So
I see more backing going on at decent levels as well. Thank you very much, everyone who's backing the Kickstarter right now. Just remember, if you back the Kickstarter, you can read the updates, and that means you can read the book before it's even released, and that's not a small thing. And there are still some big value backer levels available, and I would love to see them taken, not just for the value, although obviously that's a part of it, but because if you take them, it means we get to play games together, you get to have creative input on the book and subsequent books, and that's not a small thing. The way I got into Onyx Path, the first book I was on was as a consulting developer as a result of a Kickstarter. And it was through that I was able to start networking. I was able to find out what developers wanted from drafts, from what they looked for in red lines when they were editing, and so on. So don't discount it. It isn't just a way of writing something fun in a book. It's a way of getting to see how the machine works and see if you like it, and that can lead to some very good things. It's not a guarantee, but it can be.
Whatever price they're asking for that is worth it to be my boss.
The fact is, and this is something I've said in another video before, so apologies for the repetition if you've heard me say this before, but when I backed at the consulting developer level Werewolf 20th Anniversary Edition, I looked at it as the cost of a creative writing class, because I knew that the book I was going on was going to have a developer who was I would be able to observe how they were tutoring, mentoring writers. I was able to see how writers put together drafts. I was able to see drafts before they came out, and I was able to see the red lines. And the red line process is so important, because you get to see how a developer thinks things are good, why they think things are bad, what they suggest is amended, and so on. So don't just see it as, you put the money down and you lose it. It can be a very worthwhile investment.
Right. We have Kian, who asks, is Sam Hyde in Chicago?
He is not, and if he was, he would be an ashtray somewhere. So I guess he could be an ashtray. If people are unfamiliar with Sam Hyde, I don't think we've got long enough in this episode to talk about Sam Hyde. Look him up on the White Wolf wiki. I think Ian probably wrote the long and winded bio of Sam Hyde and how he ended up as an ashtray.
Well worth it, though.
Yeah.
Flint Arthur asks, will people and folk have a role?
Is that maybe a changeling question? No, would be the simple answer on that. There are no changelings in this book.
Are there any interesting Malkavian characters you would like to talk about? By Jason.
No. Well, the Malkavians are always the most interesting characters to talk about.
There's Boaty McBoatface. You could talk about him.
Yeah, Boaty McBoatface. I think that's One of the characters has that as a personality. We have got some of the old classic Malkavians. We have Jason Newbury. We have Evan Klein. We also have Bronwyn, who was in Chicago by Night 2nd edition, and the Rusted Veins playtest for V5. We also have Alexa Santos, who is Prince Jackson's prized hound, probably due to her pure cold-bloodedness. They are no longer a happy family, that's for sure. The Malkavians in previous editions were seen as a sort of family unit, and in this version, Son, that is the Malkavian Primogen, Jason Newbury, likes to invite the city Malkavians to group therapy sessions so he can hear their problems and he can help counsel them. And of course, in so doing, he is finding out about all of their various anxieties, all their various issues, and he then manipulates them, because Jason Newbury is a very, very unpleasant character who, you know, I think it's fair to say is designed to be hated by players and probably brought down within the first 5 sessions or so. Don't feel bad if you kill the Malkavian Primogen whilst playing a game from Chicago by Night. He isn't nice. He's not meant to stick around for years and years.
Didn't he poke out another kid's eye with a popsicle stick?
I think that is in his bio, yeah. And I don't know if I don't think that was in the previous editions. But I know in Under a Blood Red Moon, which is an old Vampire the Masquerade Werewolf of the Apocalypse sourcebook, he takes in a caitiff when the werewolves are attacking the city. A fledgling caitiff takes him in, says, "I'll look after you," locks him up in his cellar, and then very slowly diabolizes him. And it's horrible. It's quite unpleasant, but he is supposed to be an unpleasant character. So use him at your peril. If you're going to push him to his fullest extent, make sure your players are aware of the kinds of content you're going to be covering with someone like Jason Newbury, but don't be afraid of killing him off as well, because he's despicable. He could be a long-running antagonist, or he could be a short-term punching bag.
We have Lance Carter, who asks, what are your least favorite clans and bloodlines, or bloodlines?
Oh, well, this one's going to be everyone. So, Mike, you answer first.
Oh, this is a good one. My least favorite? I fucking hate Toreador, which is why it was great to write some stuff for them. But they just piss me off, and I just cannot stand them.
Clara, your least favorite clan? I think if we name bloodlines, that's too obvious. So you can't say Daughters of Cacophony or anything like that. You've got to go for a clan.
Yeah, I would say probably the Banu Hakim or the Asamite. I've never liked them. I can't really explain why. They don't speak to me in as much as the other clans do.
John?
The Giovanni, can't stand them. No, definitely not them. I like most clans. If it's mainstream, probably Ventru. Slightly less mainstream, probably Bali. I think if I was to go overall, probably Bali. I just don't like them. I think the whole concept of them is a bit mental, but you know, what can you do? The idea of sort of like inferno vampires is fine. Having that as an actual, that we are the clan of demon worshippers, that seems a bit weird, you know. But then
you will get hate mail now, because a lot of people consider them demon imprisoners. They're the jailers of demons. So say so.
It's fine. So it's just
all right,
as far as I'm concerned.
And my least favorite clan, I can see a certain use for all of them, and often I joke about Clan Ravnos and my distaste for them, but the fact is that my favorite character I ever played was Ravnos, and he was great fun, and I even enjoyed their discipline as well. So it would be unfair to say the Ravnos. I think my least favorite clan are probably the Tzimisce, or Tzimisce if you prefer. And the reason for that is because, being a complete snob, it's usually in games I play, or games I play. If there's Tzimisce in the group as well, quite often they lean very heavily on vicissitude, and I like to see variety of play. And this is the reason I love the Camarilla clans, because you see the biggest variety, I think, of characters from the Camarilla clans. At least in my experience, this is purely anecdotal. Whereas with the Tzimisce, it's an awful lot of vicissitude and not a lot of animalism or auspex. So when people play them and play them in a way that interests me, I love them. But quite often people don't.
All right. We have a question from Nicholas, who asks, will we see new amalgams?
No, there's no new amalgams in this book. I don't. Oh, actually, that's not true. I think we may have one or two in for Oblivion. I correct myself. Yes, I think the Lasombra have a couple of new amalgams. We're probably going to have to wrap up very, very soon. Let's say 10 more minutes, and then we'll be gone. So, Clara, pick the best questions. And if you haven't backed the Kickstarter yet, what's wrong with you? Back it. We're not doing this for our health.
We know where you live.
Please, please, pretty please.
Yes, sorry, we should be echoing what Mike's saying. Please back. We put a lot of time into this book, and while we love answering your questions, we would love for you to be on board with the Kickstarter even more. It's going to be a wonderful book to own, so please consider backing.
I will try to find some questions we have not answered. I've been around.
Yeah, quick fire round.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, we have something about touchstones here from Leslie. Touchstones? I know it's been a while since I played, but I don't remember those.
So touchstones are new for V5. They're actually a mechanic that was in Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition as well. And touchstones are essentially mortals or living creatures, if you want to broaden the spectrum, that vampires cling on to maintain their humanity. And when a touchstone is lost, it becomes far easier to lose humanity. Whereas if you maintain a touchstone, even if it's through some rather unhealthy, obsessive behavior, you are more likely to maintain humanity. They're like an anchor for you that prevents you from going completely wild. And sometimes it's going to be a almost healthy relationship, like it could be your girlfriend from when you were mortal and you still maintain that relationship now. Could even be a mortal relative. Other times, I think one of our Ventru, Horatio Ballard, one of his touchstones is a mortal relative, but due to the way Horatio Ballard treats his mortal family, that isn't a healthy relationship. Another Ventru, Edwin Neely, one of his touchstones is the mortal descendant of a fellow Ventru who he has basically turned into his ghoul and his mental thrall, and is just basically clinging to his chest because he thinks this person is important. But it's not a relationship founded on love.
All right, so we have a question from both Eggman Sizzle and Oceanios Veritas, and they ask what our favorite clans are.
Our favorite clans start with we'll start with you this time, Clara.
I mean, it's a tight call between Cappadocians and Ventru, very dear to my heart.
Good choice. Mike?
Sure. So my favorite clans are the Lasombra. I have a very, very special place in my heart. As you can see, I'm wearing my Sabbat Ankh, so I love my clan of shadowy goodness. But I'm very interested in seeing where they're going. But I also, I have to say, I'm a big fan of the Giovanni and the Bruja as well. Even though the Giovanni get, spooky weird.
John?
Giovanni. End thread.
John left
Hey.
the chat.
Yeah, if you've ever
Stop
played a
the video.
game with
Yeah.
John before, you will know he has a deep abiding love for the Giovanni. Yeah, it's almost as deep as the love Ambrogino Giovanni probably has for his deceased uncle's skeleton, but not quite as unhealthy.
The lost skeleton of Cadavra.
Yes. So my favorite clan, I know I get asked this on pretty much every live stream, and I always change my answer because I'm a dick. Like, but no, in truth, it really changes. It depends on what I've been writing. It depends on what I've been playing. And right now, my favorite clan is Nosferatu. And that's because in Chicago by Night, my favorite characters are of Clan Nosferatu. I think we have built a lovely little warren for this city.
All right, this is a good question from Sinrad, and it says best advice for new storytellers.
Ooh, okay. Mike, do you have advice for a new storyteller?
Yeah, I actually do. I mean, to toot my own horn a little bit, do read the city section. It does have a lot of it's got a lot of tools that you can put in your toolbox for your players. Build your city and build your game with your players. You don't have to show them all the cards. You could have your secrets in your back pocket, but have a collaborative effort. Have things that they know about that they can latch onto and kind of use as tools as well, and that you can rip out from underneath them and try to cause drama with. Also remember that, games are not railroads. You're as a storyteller for many, many years, your players will always be smarter than you. It's okay. Run with it. Celebrate that. Go with it and enjoy it as much as possible, because they're going to come up with some really crazy cool stuff, and that should be a victory for you as a storyteller.
And Clara?
No,
as in, do you have any advice for a new storyteller?
Yeah, I think my best advice is just to jump into it, and I know that's incredibly generic to say, but it's really about not being afraid of making mistakes and not being afraid. If you haven't run a game before, don't be afraid of fucking anything up. If you do, you are the storyteller, so you can always alter it the way you want it and make it look like, well, this was the plan all along. And you have so many puzzle pieces and so many things you can do with Chicago by Night that you can always add something. You can always push the group another direction, and make it fluent and make it fun, because gaming is about having fun and about exploring yourself and exploring this game you're playing. So don't be too afraid to make mistakes.
And John, you've been running a game for several years on the run now, online.
Running from a game for several years. Include the Giovanni, make them the center of everything, and always win, and that's it. You're sorted. No,
okay.
I think the most important thing to do is definitely read everything that your players write. Remember, you're not necessarily there to decide what happens, just to be the arbiter of reality. And I think probably the most important thing that I'll leave to last is a sort of recent, probably in the past sort of 8 or 9 years, that came to me. That's how old I am. That is, there isn't a wrong way of doing this. You might talk to people and they'll go, oh, that you're doing a really combat heavy vampire superhero campaign. No, I might not like that. Other people might not like that. That doesn't matter. If everyone around your table is having fun, it doesn't really matter. And if what you guys are looking to do is play Superman with fangs, do it and have fun. and I think I speak for everyone here, saying that the reason we write these books isn't so that you do what we want and this is how you use this product. No, we create these products so that you can enjoy them, and that's what they're for. And if anyone tells you any different, then just don't play with them. Play with other people who do want to do the stuff you want to do, and you'll have a good time. I certainly do.
My advice is pretty simple, and it's more on the organizational side. It's make lists. I find that when I first started running games, I would write essay length, plots, dialogue for characters, the kinds of things they would say, and I would detail encounters down to the minute, and that was very helpful for me when I was first starting, but I found more helpful since then that making lists of interesting characters and a few interesting features about them, interesting locations and a few interesting features about them, interesting rumors and a few interesting things about them. And this is the kind of thing we've got in the city chapters, the kind of thing we've got in the chronicle hooks, and every single kindred in this book has rumors and whispers, rather, associated with them, the sorts of things you might hear that could be true, might be not. And by doing that, if you want to run a sort of sandboxy game, a toolboxy game, and your characters just walk into the Succubus Club or the Blue Velvet Club and they start talking to the vampires, right away you have your list. You can see who's there, what do they look like, what are they doing, and you can say what's going on in the Succubus Club because you've got a list of entertainments. Lists are very easy to write, very quick to write. You don't have to spend much time preparing. And by just using lists, just using those bullet points, the players develop the plot. They will find one of those things the most interesting thing in the entire night, and they will keep digging and digging and digging to the point that you have to improvise. As soon as you start doing that, they have made the plot up in their heads, and you bounce off of them. You then write the plot if you want, or keep improvising based on what the players want to hear. And you can be upfront about it and say, this is entirely player driven, or you can have your storyteller screen, or you can be sat at your PC and you can just react to what they're doing, let them lead you. And that can be an incredibly rewarding experience for the players. So I think we'll have one more question, Clara. Only one more question.
I'll just say, as an extension to what you just said, if you are sitting at a table, I can recommend using a tablet, mostly because it will provide you with quick and easy access to maps, to pictures of your NPCs, you can search, put your documents in the tablet, and you can search right away and find what you need to find. It will save you a massive amount of time. You don't have to flick through papers, and I know there is a certain charm to that, and I still do it myself, but it is a useful thing to invest in if you want to seriously run games. So we have some questions about the attributes. Will it still be 753?
What is 753?
The point distribution.
The points. Come on.
Primary,
yeah, I know what they are. I'm
secondary,
sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So
come on, Clara, you're supposed to point and pick an excellent question. For
I didn't ask the question. So I think what they mean here is will they still have to part their attributes into points of 7, 5, and 3?
Oh, I see. Well, that would be down to the V5 core book, not what's in Chicago by Night. And point distribution is slightly different in 5th edition. So that answers that. I think so. Well, come on. Well, let's have one more question. One more.
All right, so we do have a question here. This is the last question from Joseph Burke. Pentex in Chicago.
Yes, Pentex is in Chicago. I know Pentex is strictly a werewolf thing, but if you read between the lines, and you'll find this with every single game I work on, and a lot of the other writers I work with do this, they will fit Pentex subsidiaries into everything. they write, because that is how Pentex rules the world. It isn't by having a massive, great Pentex HQ in Hancock Tower with its logo on the side. That isn't how Pentex operates. Pentex operates by when your characters need to stop for gas, they stop at an Endron gas station. When they need to pick up pills for their touchstone antibiotics because they've got an infection, they have to go to a Magadon pharmacy. When they need to meet up with a contact in a discreet restaurant, they go to an O'Tolly's just on the interstate. And the reason you do this, all these Pentex subsidiaries, they seem innocuous enough, and to vampires they don't have any effect whatsoever. But when you then go on to run a werewolf game for those same players, and they realize that all of these subsidiaries are parts of the biggest organization, biggest mortal organization serving the worm, they realize how absolutely infected the world is by Pentex and therefore the worm. So we have done the exact same thing with Chicago by Night. It's my Pentex philosophy. It's if there's a character with investments, they will be probably in a Pentex subsidiary, or if they have in fact, should I ruin it? If there's anyone particularly eagle-eyed, when the Lasombra preview comes out, if someone can gather who it is that's being fed from in the intro fiction, then I will buy you a can of Coke. There you go. I know it's a rather nebulous way to end, but I'm going to thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. And thank you all of those of you who have backed the Kickstarter, even if it's for $1, from $1 to $800. I am incredibly grateful. We all are at Onyx Path because you keep supporting me, you keep supporting us, and these fantastic writers with me who have taken time out of their day or evening to come on here and answer your questions as well. We're all incredibly grateful for your support of our games. So dig deep, back our Kickstarter, buy a book that will look fantastic. It has all of their work in and the work of many other writers and artists who have been a thrill to develop for. And it's been one of the best projects I've had the pleasure to work on. So thank you, John. Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone who watched. Thank you, me. And bye-bye.